The son died suddenly after the marriage. A week later, his mother received a letter from him and Laura, with tears of joy, looking at David and Rachel. David, you have grown so much. I never imagined this day would come so soon. David, smiling, eyes shining, thanks Mom. I wouldn't be here without you. Today is the beginning of a new life for me. The guests approach to congratulate the couple. Laura, in her mother of the groom dress, beams with pride as she watches David dance with Rachel. The happiness on his face is palpable, but an unsettling feeling begins to grow in his chest. The camera zooms in on Laura, showing her expression of joy slowly transforming into concern. She notices that David is starting to sweat profusely and his face is turning pale. Music and conversations become a distant murmur. Laura, approaching David with an alarmed expression. David, are you okay? You look a little pale. David tries to smile, but his face shows signs of pain. Suddenly, he falls to the ground with a thunderous crash. The music stops abruptly, and a scream of horror rips through the room. Laura, screaming desperately, kneeling next to David. David, wake up please. Guests crowd around, and emergency personnel come running. Laura is paralyzed, her mind in shock as she tries to hold David's hand, which is cold and lifeless. The camera focuses on Laura's face, showing the agony and panic that consumes her. Laura, whispering with a broken voice and tears falling down his face. No, it can't be. Why are you leaving, my son? I cannot lose you. The doctors try to revive David, but time seems to stop. Laura watches helplessly as the doctor's efforts become increasingly desperate. The camera focuses on the doctors' faces, showing their helplessness. When the doctor finally walks away, the truth is established. Laura reels, her world falling apart as the guests whisper among themselves, some crying and others in shock. The camera captures the moment when Laura sits on the floor, hugging David's body, her heartbreaking cries echoing in the empty room. Laura, in a low voice, almost inaudible, no. I can't live without you. What am I going to do now? Laura, with tears of joy, looking at David and Rachel. David, you have grown so much. I never imagined this day would come so soon. David, smiling, eyes shining, thanks Mom. I wouldn't be here without you. Today is the beginning of a new life for me. The guests approach to congratulate the couple. Laura, in her mother of the groom dress, beams with pride as she watches David dance with Rachel. The happiness on his face is palpable, but an unsettling feeling begins to grow in his chest. The camera zooms in on Laura, showing her expression of joy slowly transforming into concern. She notices that David is starting to sweat profusely and his face is turning pale. Music and conversations become a distant murmur. Laura, approaching David with an alarmed expression. David, are you okay? You look a little pale. David tries to smile, but his face shows signs of pain. Suddenly, he falls to the ground with a thunderous crash. The music stops abruptly, and a scream of horror rips through the room. Laura, screaming desperately, kneeling next to David. David, wake up please. Guests crowd around, and emergency personnel come running. Laura is paralyzed, her mind in shock as she tries to hold David's hand, which is cold and lifeless. The camera focuses on Laura's face, showing the agony and panic that consumes her. Laura, whispering with a broken voice and tears falling down his face. No, it can't be. Why are you leaving, my son? I cannot lose you. The doctors try to revive David, but time seems to stop. Laura watches helplessly as the doctor's efforts become increasingly desperate. The camera focuses on the doctors' faces, showing their helplessness. When the doctor finally walks away, the truth is established. Laura reels, her world falling apart as the guests whisper among themselves, some crying and others in shock. The camera captures the moment when Laura sits on the floor, hugging David's body, her heartbreaking cries echoing in the empty room. Laura, in a low voice, almost inaudible, "No. I can't live without you. What am I going to do now?" Suddenly, the doorbell rings, breaking the oppressive silence of the house. Laura slowly heads towards the door, a look of exhaustion on her face. She opens the door and finds a letter on the floor, addressed to her. The camera focuses on Laura's trembling hand as she picks up the letter and examines it with curiosity and fear. Laura, mumbling while examining the letter, "What is this? I wasn't expecting anything today." Laura takes the letter to the table, where she carefully opens it. The camera focuses on her trembling hands as she tears open the envelope, and Laura's voice cracks with each movement. She pulls out a handwritten letter and begins to read it. The camera alternates between Laura's face and the content of the letter, showing her reaction as she appears. Laura, with a broken voice and tears gathering in his eyes, "Dear Mom, if you are reading this, it means I am not here to hug you. I am so sorry, but there were things I couldn't tell you before." As Laura reads, the camera shows her surprised and confused expression. The letter is full of promises and apologies from David, revealing hidden aspects of his life and mentioning secrets that he had kept. Laura reads the words with growing desperation, her tears falling onto the paper. Laura, loudly, with a broken and trembling voice, "David, what are you trying to tell me? What secrets did you hide? Why didn't you tell me before?" The camera shows Laura trying to understand the contents of the letter. She sifts through the details, looking for clues and answers in every word. The desperation on his face increases as he tries to decipher the message in the midst of his pain. Laura gets up from the table and begins to walk around the house, the letter in her hand. She heads into the living room, looking around with an air of confusion and desolation. The camera follows her, capturing every unsteady step she takes, as her mind is overwhelmed by the shock of the revelation. Laura, screaming into the void, with a voice full of anguish, "David, why did you leave me with these questions? What were you trying to hide? I can hold it anymore." The camera opens with Laura sitting on the living room floor, surrounded by memories of David and the letter he left her. She is exhausted and disoriented, her hands still shaking after reading the message full of secrets. The sun is beginning to set, casting a warm, brooding light through the curtains. Laura looks at the letter with a mixture of desperation and confusion. Laura, mumbling, with a broken voice, "What else were you hiding, David? What didn't you tell me?" Laura takes the letter and begins to look through it again, searching every word for clues about secrets David might have been hiding. As he does so, he finds a small piece of paper inside the envelope, with a handwritten address. The camera focuses on the address as Laura reads it with increasing anxiety. Laura, reading aloud with a trembling voice, 108 Elm Street. "Why are you giving me this address? What is there?" With a sense of determination and fear, Laura decides to visit the address mentioned in the letter. The camera follows her as she prepares to leave, her face showing a mix of nervousness and resolve. She puts on a coat and leaves the house, the cold night wind hitting her face as she walks to the car. Laura, mumbling while driving, with a restless voice, "I hope it's not a mistake. I have to find out what is going on." The camera shows Laura leading through dark and desolate streets, increasing tension as the place becomes increasingly unfamiliar. Finally, she arrives at an old, worn-out building, apparently abandoned. She parks the car and approaches cautiously. Laura enters the building. The camera follows her, capturing every hesitant step she takes. The place is in ruins, with old furniture and dust accumulated everywhere. Laura explores the environment carefully, her breathing heavy and her eyes attentive to every detail. Laura, whispering, with fear and despair, "What am I looking for here? David, please give me a sign." As Laura investigates, she finds a room hidden behind a bookcase. The camera shows the look of shock and horror on her face as she enters the room. Inside, she finds several documents and photos that reveal David's secret life: a diary, photos of unknown people, and documents that indicate a connection to a mysterious company. Laura, crying and talking to herself, in an anguished voice, "I cannot believe this. Who are you really, David? What did you hide from me?" Laura begins to read the diary, her tears falling onto the pages as she discovers information about a second family David had. The pain and betrayal hit her hard, and she sits on the floor, the diary in her hands, feeling the weight of every word. Laura, in a whisper, with a voice full of pain, "Your love was a lie. How could I not notice? Now I understand how much you deceived me." Laura is back at her house. The opening scene shows the inside of the house in complete chaos. Documents scattered on the floor, torn photos, and the feeling that nothing is the same as before. The camera focuses on Laura as she tries to process this new reality, her eyes still red and swollen from crying. The expression of shock and anger is evident on his face. Laura is sitting in front of the table, David's diary open in front of her. She is trying to understand what she read, but the pain and confusion prevent her from concentrating. Her thoughts are interrupted when the phone rings, and Laura hesitates before answering, her breathing heavy and nervous. Laura, answering the phone with a trembling voice, "Hello." On the other end of the line is David's sister Isabel, a woman Laura has never known well. Isabel seems worried and confused about the situation. The conversation is tense and emotionally charged, with Isabel trying to understand what is happening. Isabel, in a worried voice, "Laura, I am Isabel, David's sister. I got the news about the funeral, and I heard you found something. What is happening?" Laura grips the phone tightly, her body shaking as she tries to find the words to explain what she discovered. The frustration and pain are evident in his voice. Laura, screaming and crying, "David had another family, Isabel. He deceived me all the time. There was a diary, documents, a whole life that I didn't know about. How did you not know that?" Isabel looks shocked, her voice a mix of surprise and sadness. The camera focuses on Laura's face as she listens to Isabel's response, her expression showing a mixture of relief and confusion. Isabel, in a low, pained voice, I didn't know. David never told me about it. He was always so reserved. I'm sorry, Laura. I know this doesn't help, but I want to understand what happened." Laura and Isabel continue talking. The tension between them is palpable. Isabel reveals that David had distanced himself from the family for unknown reasons, and that he never shared details about his personal life. Laura's pain is evident, and the camera captures the fragility of her situation. Laura, desperate, with tears in her eyes, "I feel like I'm living a lie. I don't know who to trust anymore. How can I rebuild my life knowing it was all based on lies?" After the call, Laura collapses into a chair, David's diary still in her hands. The camera focuses on her face as she tries to process the conversation and the impact of the new revelations. The despair and sense of betrayal run deep, and she feels completely alone. Laura begins to think about the implications of the discoveries. Her mind is full of unanswered questions. She stands up slowly, as if trying to compose herself to face the next step. The camera shows her as she looks out the window, lost in her thoughts, the night sky reflecting her sadness. Laura, in a sigh to herself, "I need to find answers, find a way to move forward. But where do I start? Where is the truth that David took with him?" The camera opens with a shot of Laura in her room, watching the sunrise from the window. The golden light illuminates his tired face, showing the traces of a sleepless night. Laura looks lost in thought, holding a photo of her and David in happier days. His expression is a mixture of nostalgia and bitterness, as he prepares to face a day full of uncertainty. Laura places the photo on the nightstand delicately, as if she were putting a piece of her heart there. He heads to the closet and starts searching for a dusty old box that has been sitting in storage for years. The camera follows his hands as he pulls out papers and memories he has accumulated over time, searching for something that will make sense of it all. Laura, mumbling to herself, with a trembling voice, "There must be something else. Something that explains why David did this. I can't stay with this feeling of not knowing." Suddenly, Laura finds an old letter, still closed, addressed to her in David's handwriting. The camera focuses on her hands as tears fill her eyes. Laura opens the letter with trembling hands and begins to read, her face changing from shock to a mixture of sadness and understanding. David voiceover, reading the letter. "Dear Laura, if you are reading this, it means that things did not go as we expected. There are so many things I wish I had told you, but fear and shame prevented me from being honest with you. I always wanted to protect you, but now I see that was a mistake." Laura drops the letter and sits on the bed, her tears flowing freely. The camera focuses on her face, capturing the internal struggle between anger, pain, and the love she still feels for David. She closes her eyes, trying to contain the flood of emotions. Laura, screaming with frustration and pain. "David, why couldn't you trust me? Why did you leave me alone to face all this?" The camera follows Laura as she abruptly gets up and walks to the car. His face is determined, a spark of resolution in his eyes. She knows she needs to confront her past and get answers, no matter how painful it may be. Laura drives through the city until she reaches a small coffee shop in an old neighborhood. She sits at a table and looks around, nervous, waiting for someone. Shortly after, an older man enters the cafeteria and approaches Laura. It's Tomas, an old friend of David's and someone Laura never knew well. He sits across from her, and they both look at each other in silence, the tension palpable in the air. Laura takes a deep breath and begins to speak. "Laura," in a firm but hurt voice. "Tomas, I need to know the truth. David left me a letter, and I'm trying to understand what happened. Did you know about his other life? From your other family?" Tomas looks down, his expression is one of guilt and sadness. The camera focuses on their hands, nervously clasped on the table. He looks up, facing Laura with a look of compassion. "Thomas," with a soft voice full of regret. "Laura, David was a complicated man. He made mistakes, big mistakes. But I know he loved you, even though he never knew how to deal with his own demons. I'm not here to justify it, but I can tell you that he always tried to protect you, even from himself." Laura listens silently, her face hardened by the mix of emotions. Thomas's words are a bitter balm. They offer him answers, but they also deepen the wound. The camera captures the moment when Laura realizes that the truth is more complex than she imagined, that David was a man divided between two worlds. Laura, with a broken but determined voice, "I don't know if I'll ever be able to forgive him. But I need to understand, I need to know why he did what he did. Can you help me find those answers?" Tomas nods slowly, knowing that the truth can be painful but necessary. The scene ends with Laura and Tomas sitting in the cafeteria, two people united by a man and a story full of secrets and pain. The camera moves away, revealing through the window the daylight that begins to illuminate the uncertain path that Laura is willing to take. The camera shows Laura sitting at the cafeteria table, her face marked by the tension of the last few days. In front of her, Tomas sits in silence, visibly uncomfortable but determined to tell the truth. The soft light of the evening filters through the windows, creating an atmosphere charged with anticipation. Laura takes a deep breath, preparing to hear what she fears she will discover. "Thomas," in a deep and serious voice. "Laura, I need you to understand that what I am going to tell you is not easy to accept. David lived in a world that he always tried to keep separate from yours. There were things that even I didn't know until recently." Laura nods, her hands gripping the edge of the table as if trying to hold on to the reality crumbling around her. The camera zooms in on his face, capturing the nervousness and determination in his eyes. Laura, with a firm but trembling voice, I'm ready, Tomas. I can't continue living with so many doubts. I need to know everything, even if it hurts. Tomas sighs deeply, as if the weight of his words were a burden he has carried for a long time. He begins to speak, his voice low but clear, filling the space with a story Laura never imagined. Thomas, looking at Laura seriously, David got involved in shady dealings many years ago, before he met you. When he fell in love with you, he tried to leave that life, but it was more complicated than he thought. There were people, connections, things I couldn't escape. The camera shows Laura's reaction, her face hardening as she listens. Tomas' words are like blows that hit her again and again, revealing a life full of secrets and lies. Her breathing quickens and her eyes fill with tears. Laura, in a choked voice, fighting back tears, cloudy business? What are you talking about? Why did he never tell me anything? Tomas lowers his gaze, the pain is palpable in his voice as he continues speaking. The camera focuses on his hands, clasped tightly, as if trying to find the right words. Thomas, in a low and serious voice, David was afraid, Laura. Afraid of losing you, afraid that if you knew the truth, you would walk away from him. He tried to get out of that world, but there were too many things at stake. People who wouldn't let him go so easily. Laura remains silent, Tomas' words swirl in her mind like a whirlpool of emotions. The betrayal, the fear, the sadness, all mixed together as he tries to process what he has heard. The camera follows her as she gets up from the table, her body shaking with the intensity of her feelings. Laura, screaming, with a broken voice, I can't believe this was all a lie. How could I be so blind? Tomas stands up too, trying to calm her down. The camera captures the tension between them, the air charged with unexpressed emotions. Laura walks away, her steps quick and desperate as she tries to escape the weight of the truth she has just discovered. She leaves the cafeteria, the cold night air hitting her face and her tears falling freely. The camera follows Laura as she walks through the deserted streets, her mind filled with confusion and pain. He stops in front of a park, his knees buckle, and he collapses onto a bench, sobbing uncontrollably. The loneliness of the night surrounds her, and the emptiness of betrayal consumes her. Laura, in a whisper, with a broken voice full of pain, David, why did you do this to me? How could you hide so much from me? Now what do I do with all this pain?